Morning, listener. My name is Sammuel Githaiga. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, practicing in Nairobi, and we're discussing the rights to housing in Kenya. We had to discuss to try and disseminate the law because we always told that ignorance is no defense.
Sure.
So you need to know some of these rights when it comes to housing and what the law states and what acts of parliament provide.
Wakili, I would like to understand what solutions can be explored to tackle the housing crisis in Kenya.
Thank you, Terry. Again, as you've said, we have these laws that would address the housing shortages in the country. So the first thing is actually to implement those laws. And the very first thing, I believe, we've heard of houses collapsing, houses tumbling down. So the very first thing that we can actually do to address some of these shortages is first to ensure that when we are doing construction, we are doing it in line with what the law provides. We do not take shortcuts. If somebody has an approval to say construct a 4-story building, you don't go and do six stories just because you've seen that there's room for more tenants in that place. So the very first thing of maybe addressing that challenge is first by following the law. Secondly, and I think this is the most important thing, is that there's need to have private-public partnerships, the PPPs, the 3Ps. These ones come to really address, because the government may not be able to fully implement the agenda to provide housing for all the 54 or the 50 million citizens. But when you coordinate, when you cooperate, when you collaborate with the private sector, because remember the private sector has these expatriates, they have experts in certain areas that the government may not actually have. So when you cooperate with the private, when you get that exposure to the private, it's normally say that the private will do things in a better way more than the government, because the government people may want to take shortcuts. So if you have that that partnership, it means that indeed the end result will be something that is very good. I'll give an example, Terry. Look at the roads. If we give a road to maybe a local contractor, you find that the same will take either years or it will be done to a substandard level. But if you give that road to either a international contractor or a contractor who is not based in the country, you find that it is done to standard. So it's the same thing with these houses. Partnership with the private would address a huge gap. Partnerships with the private sector would really address a huge gap where the government may not be able to address some of these challenges to provide housing for every citizen.
And do you think the private and private partnership will bring about better accessibility and of course quality? And how will they do that?
Thank you, Terry. I believe that when there's an intention and there's a purpose to arrive somewhere, then I think the journey becomes seamless. But again, remember again, not everybody is a saint. That's why we have monitoring and evaluation. We have occasional evaluations that need to be undertaken. We have occasional audits to ask questions. If let's say there's a road construction, there's a nested construction, we have the approvals that are normally granted. Say, for instance, the environment assessment impact by NEMA. They are the surrounding neighborhood. Would they agree to such an approval? So the private, yes, they can assist the government in meeting that agenda. But then they are not as saints also. An element of evaluation, monitoring. Who is auditing the work? Who is actually doing that bit? Because we say that there must be a third party who normally audits the work that is not normally done by either the two institutions, that is the government and the private partnerships. Who is there to audit and who is there to give recommendations? Have there been shortcuts that have been taken? And what has been done to address those challenges? Challenges will, of course, be established, identified, but have they been addressed? Have they been tackled? That is the only way that then we can then task and ensure that success rate with the PPPs have been successful, and we can then cooperate, and then we can continue with such projects into the future.
Are there any successful housing projects that have been, developed by the government?
Yes, Terry, we have, of course, remember, first of all, we have the national housing. And the houses that have been undertaken, the projects that have been undertaken by the National Housing Scheme, those houses have stood the test of time. They're still standing now. They were built to standard. We have proper sanitation. We have proper water. Drainage systems are adequate, such that if we were to follow certain regulations, if we were to follow such projects that have been done in the past, and we follow strictly to what the law stipulates, I believe that the national housing model would be the best for me. Would be the very very best. We also have private projects. We have the Greenfield in Machakos. We have the Eco Village in Tatu City. If these private partnerships come in play, they come to assist, or rather, they come to provide a benchmark where the government can actually benchmark on certain projects, then I think the future would always be bright. But if we take shortcuts, I can tell you that a project may be started today, but in 2 years it becomes a white elephant.
I just think that, or I feel like these projects are mainly within Nairobi and in major cities. So how can we ensure that these projects and models can be scaled up and can be replicated in other regions?
Thank you, Terry. This brings to mind the aspect of devolution. And this is what was supposed to be achieved by devolution after 2010. And I think so far so good. The last 14 years when we've had this constitution, we're still devolving some of these functions. And it's now acceptable that a graduate can actually graduate from Nairobi University and go work in West Pokot County, earning the same salary with somebody who works in Nairobi, Nakuru, Kisumu, or Mombasa. So the same way with devolution, and the same way that we're able to ensure that we have these projects successful in other towns is by having a participatory engagement with the county residents. Because if, for instance, we have the national housing scheme in Nairobi, what comes to mind is of course Embakasi Nyayo Estate in Embakasi. If we're able to replicate such schemes across the counties, if we have that goodwill in all the counties, I believe that we're able to then move such projects to other counties. If, say, a developer comes to the government and says, I want to do a project, say for instance, in a place like Kitui. So what is the government doing to facilitate that successful implementation of that project? You don't place blockages to this developer so that if they are to obtain materials, you give tax incentives that will then enable more developers to come out, be able to develop such estates, do projects, and then the same we find it's actually implemented across all the counties in the country. So it's about the government giving incentives, giving tax breaks, giving or rather having those models. Of course, they are being acceptable, but at what extent is the government supporting this developer? By not asking for bribes. When somebody is going for an approval, you approve what has been submitted. You don't tell the developer to take a shortcut. You can have more money than if you are to pay to do this. So I think the challenge here still goes back to the government. What are they doing to ensure that this developer can actually go to the outskirts of the major cities, can go to a place like Makueni, can go to a place like Murang'a, can go to a place like Laikipia, Samburu, Isiolo, to undertake projects that would then benefit the local citizens of that particular county.
And Wakili, what do you think are the main obstacles that face